My name is Ursula Clayborne. I am 72 years old, and for 40 years I owned a small flower shop in Charleston, South Carolina. I used to believe that beauty and peace could survive in any room if you knew how to arrange them. Until that night, when peace shattered in my own dining room. The glass hit my cheek before I even understood what was happening. A sharp sting, a shock of warmth. Red wine ran down my neck and soaked the collar of my ivory blouse. For a second, I thought the world had gone silent, but it was only my ears ringing. Across the table, my daughter-in-law stood swaying, her hand still extended from the throw. The crystal stem trembled between her fingers before it fell, hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. She stared at me with wine-bright eyes and hissed, "Maids must obey." My son gasped. I didn't. I reached for the napkin beside my plate, dabbed the stain, and said softly, "Noted." I remember the smell of the roast cooling, the candle flame flickering as if unsure which way to lean. The house I built for warmth suddenly felt colder than the marble floors of my shop's old walk-in cooler. Fiona had arrived late again, perfume first, excuses second. She poured herself wine before saying hello, then poured again before tasting the food I had spent hours preparing. When I refused to refill her glass, she looked at me not like a mother, not even like a person, but like a servant who had forgotten her place. Daniel, my son, sat frozen between us. He always did, trying to smooth over storms that never came from him. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything back. I simply looked at the shards glittering on the floor and thought of all the petals I had swept from my shop after closing, how even beauty, once broken, cuts you if you pick it up too soon. When Fiona stumbled out of the room, muttering, I went to the sink. I rinsed my face under cold water, watching red mix with white porcelain. Then I looked in the mirror. My skin had thinned over the years, but the woman staring back was still sharp, still capable of drawing lines. I picked up my phone. The screen reflected the bruise beginning to bloom under my eye. I took a photo, then another of the tables, the spilled wine, the glass fragments. Evidence, not revenge. Downstairs, the house had gone quiet. Upstairs, a door slammed. Somewhere between the two, something inside me clicked into place. At 72, I had no husband to defend me, no family to hide behind, no patience left for people confusing kindness with weakness. I had lived through births and funerals, droughts and debt, hurricanes and holidays, but never had I been treated as less than human in my own home. That night, I documented, line by line, time, place, injury. I folded the blood-stained napkin, placed it in a plastic bag, labeled it with a pen from my old register drawer. My hands no longer shook. Outside, the wind picked up. Curtains moved. In their shadows, the glass shards on the floor shimmered like tiny mirrors, reflecting a woman I hadn't seen in years, the one who knew how to stand her ground without raising her voice. The next morning, Fiona would wake up and find something waiting for her downstairs. Not breakfast, not forgiveness, something she never expected, and when she saw it, what I left on that table, she would scream. After the officers left that night, silence filled the house the way dust fills an empty shop, thick, invisible, and heavy. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock above the pantry door, a wedding gift from my husband Raymond, long gone but still keeping time for a house that forgot how to breathe. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea. The air smelled of burnt roast and red wine. Every so often, the light above the sink flickered, scattering reflections of the broken glass across the floor. Tiny fragments of crystal shimmered like stars that had fallen too low. When I closed my eyes, I was no longer 72. I was 28 again, arranging lilies in the window of my flower shop, humming to the rhythm of Charleston's slow mornings. The bell above the door had jingled every time Raymond came in with his crooked smile and cheap coffee. Back then, the world was smaller, kinder, and I believed love was enough to keep it turning. He died at 48 suddenly, one April morning. A heart that worked too hard simply stopped. I remember holding Daniel's shoulders as we watched the hearse drive away. He was 16, trembling but pretending not to. I told him, "You'll grow into a man your father would be proud of." For years, I believed that promise came true, until tonight. Now I was back in the kitchen of the home we built together. Same tiles, same window. Only the voices had changed. The crystal shards caught the light again. I could see my reflection fractured across them, one face in 20 pieces. One for every year I had given up something for this family. When Fiona called me a maid, she didn't just throw a glass. She threw every quiet sacrifice I'd ever made. The nights I stayed up sewing curtains, so the house looked warm when Daniel brought guests. The birthdays I spent alone because he had business dinners. The money I lent them when the restaurant opened, saying it didn't matter if they couldn't pay me back. Maybe I made it too easy to forget me. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff but steady. I swept the glass with measured movements, each stroke of the broom deliberate. I thought about how many times I had done this exact motion, sweeping petals, sweeping leaves, sweeping pieces of a life that never quite stayed whole. The last piece clinked into the dustpan, a perfect triangle that caught the overhead light and threw it back onto the ceiling in a trembling shimmer. For a second, it looked almost beautiful. Then I dropped it into the trash, and the light disappeared. I whispered to no one, "So this is what it feels like when the house stops being yours." The night pressed against the windows. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed, and a dog barked once, twice, then gave up. I stayed seated for a long while, tracing the rim of my teacup with one finger. My reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar. Older, yes, but also sharper. Like someone emerging from under years of quiet dust. "Wara," I murmured under my breath. "Some children grow older, but never grow up." The phrase hung in the air like incense, faint but persistent. I thought of Daniel, my boy who used to bring me wildflowers after school. He once told me, "Mom, you're the kindest person I know." Somewhere along the way, he stopped saying that. Maybe kindness bored him, or maybe it embarrassed him, the way decency embarrasses people who live too long in noise. I rinsed my cup and placed it upside down on the drying rack. Habit, order, the small rituals that make sense when nothing else does. As I turned off the lights, the room plunged into soft gray, lit only by the distant glow from the porch lamp. The broken stem of the wine glass still lay under the table, too large to sweep, too sharp to touch. I left it there. It felt right that something dangerous remained, a reminder that civility without respect cuts deeper than anger ever could. When I finally went upstairs, I paused at the door of the guest room. Fiona's perfume still lingered, sweet and heavy. The bed was unmade. A crimson smear of lipstick stained the rim of a wine glass on the nightstand. For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. A perfect circle. The mark of a woman who believed she owned every room she entered. In the mirror above the dresser, I saw myself again. Not the bruised cheek or the tired eyes, but the woman behind them, the one who had held her ground while everything else collapsed. I whispered to that reflection, "You did not lose your dignity tonight." She lost hers. Downstairs, the clock ticked on, unbothered. I turned away from the mirror, pulled the curtains closed, and whispered one last thought into the still air before lying down, fully dressed. "Tomorrow," I said, "we begin again." Outside, the first light of dawn tried to find its way through the cracks of the blinds. It landed on the kitchen floor, on the very spot where the glass had shattered. The shards sparkled one last time before the sun washed them out completely. And in that brief shimmer, I saw it. The difference between breaking and being broken. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, a towel pressed against my cheek, watching the bruise deepen from rose to plum. The clock read 2:15. I could still hear Fiona's voice echoing through the walls like a stain that refused to fade. The house smelled of iron and spilled wine. The silence was alive, as if the furniture itself was listening. When the bleeding stopped, I pulled the towel away and studied the dark spot it left behind. Proof that something ugly had happened here. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding, but an act meant to humiliate. My hands moved without hurry. I laid the towel flat on the counter, slipped it into a clear plastic bag from under the sink, pressed the air out, and sealed it. Old florist habits die hard. I'd always labeled everything: seed packets, ribbon rolls, even receipts. Precision was my language long before pain was. I found a black marker and wrote across the bag in careful letters, Exhibit A. Then I began collecting the rest: the napkin with the wine stain, the broken stem from the floor, a single piece of crystal with my reflection still caught inside it. I placed each into separate bags, sealing them one by one. It felt less like vengeance and more like ceremony, a ritual for reclaiming control. For 40 years, my shop had smelled of order, eucalyptus, soap, and quiet discipline. Every bouquet had its rhythm: tall stems at the back, soft blooms in front, colors that spoke in harmony. I'd taught that to my apprentices, grace as geometry disguised as kindness. Tonight I found grace again, but not in roses, in evidence. When the floor was clean, I turned on my laptop. The glow from the screen washed my face pale blue. The cursor blinked, waiting. I named the file Incident, Clayborne Residence. My fingers hesitated before typing. How do you describe the moment your family fractures? How do you record humiliation without making it sound like confession? Still, I wrote, date October 14th, time approximately 7:48 p.m. Subject, domestic assault, object used, crystal wine glass, injury, left cheek contusion. The words looked sterile on the screen, almost foreign. I kept typing, capturing every detail: the temperature, the meal, the insult. Each sentence stripped emotion until all that remained was fact. Cold, clear, irrefutable fact. That, I told myself, is how truth survives. Not in anger, but in documentation. At some point, I drifted back to the memory of my shop again. How every morning I'd unlock the door before sunrise, the city still half asleep. The smell of damp earth and cardboard boxes filled the air. I'd check invoices, sharpen the floral shears, and hum to myself as I trimmed stems to equal length. It was work that rewarded patience. You couldn't rush beauty. It wilted under haste. The law was no different. Proof, order, process. Things I'd never studied formally but understood instinctively. I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it Records. Inside, I saved the photos I'd taken, the bruise, the shards, the stain on the tablecloth. Then I plugged my phone into charge and sat staring at the screen until the battery icon turned green. 4:22 a.m. I made tea, though the act felt mechanical. Steam rose, and in it I saw my younger self again. Steady, patient, hopeful. The woman Raymond had fallen. In love with. The one who believed family meant safety. The tea tasted bitter. I reached for the phone again, scrolling through contacts until I found her name, Marianne Holt. We had met 30 years ago when she ordered tulips for her daughter's graduation. Later, after her husband's drinking turned violent, I helped her file restraining orders, driving her to court in my old Buick when she had no one else. She used to say, I was too calm for chaos. Now the roles have reversed. The clock read 5:59 when I pressed the call button. The line clicked once, twice, then her voice, rough with sleep, answered. Ursula, is everything all right? I paused, letting the silence settle before replying. I'm afraid not. I need some legal advice. The rustle of sheets, a sigh. Tell me what happened. So I did, in the same tone I used to recite morning inventory. Factual, dry, without tremor. When I finished, there was a long pause on her end. Finally, she said, You're too calm, Ursula. I stared at the cooling tea, its surface rippling slightly under the ceiling fan. I've practiced calm all my life, I said. It's the only thing that ever kept me safe. Her voice softened. Do you want me to come over? No, just tell me what to do. Document everything. Photos, timestamps, injuries. You've done that already, haven't you? A small laugh escaped me, short and humorless. Of course. Then get some rest. I'll be there at 8 with the forms. When we hung up, dawn had begun to seep through the curtains. The light painted the kitchen a muted gold, touching the evidence bags laid neatly on the table. They looked almost like art exhibits, tiny still lifes of betrayal. I sat and watched the light climb, inch by inch, over each labeled surface. Exhibit A, towel. Exhibit B, napkin. Exhibit C, glass stem. Somewhere between exhaustion and clarity, I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. The world outside began to stir. Birds calling, cars starting, a neighbor's dog barking faintly. I listened, absorbing every mundane sound as if the universe were reminding me, "You're still here." I took a pen from the drawer and added one final note to the document. The subject remains calm. Immediate action pending legal counsel. It reads like someone else's life, but it was mine. I closed the laptop and placed it beside the evidence bags, aligning their edges perfectly. Order returned, 1 square inch at a time. Then I opened the window. The morning air slipped in, cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of soil from the garden. I looked out and saw the hydrangeas bending under the weight of dew, their petals pale blue like the veins on my hands. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kinship with them. Delicate, yes, but resilient. In that quiet moment, I understood something simple. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the discipline to stay whole when everything else is splintering. The clock struck 6, the same hour I used to open the shop decades ago. My body still remembered the rhythm. Stretch, breathe, prepare for another day. So I did. I tied back my hair, cleaned the counter once more, and straightened my back. By the time Marianne's car pulled into the driveway, the table was cleared, the kettle reheated, and my bruise had turned the color of dusk. Everything was in its place. Everything was ready for the next step. By the time the sun rose, the house no longer felt like mine. The warmth that used to greet the morning had turned into something cold and sterile, like a waiting room where no one ever smiled. I stood in the hallway with a cup of tea, listening to the slow creak of footsteps upstairs. Fiona was awake. The faint thud of her heels moved across the floorboards, uneven, irritated. When I opened the curtains, daylight spilled in, flat, white, merciless. It landed on the evidence bags, still lined on the table, labels glinting under the cold glow. The clock ticked 7:21. Marianne's voice replayed in my head. Document, then act. A knock came at the door, 2 sharp raps. I didn't flinch. When I opened it, 2 officers stood on the porch, their badges catching the morning light. One was young and polite, the other older, already tired of other people's chaos. "Mrs. Clayborne?" the older one asked. "Yes, please, come in." They stepped inside, the smell of rain still clinging to their jackets. The younger one nodded toward the table. "We received your call last night, ma'am. You filed a report about an assault?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Everything is documented." I handed them the file folder I had prepared. Photos, timestamps, notes printed and signed. The younger officer looked impressed. The older one raised an eyebrow. "Efficient," he murmured. "I used to run a flower shop," I replied. "I learned to prepare for any kind of weather." From upstairs came a sudden clatter. A drawer slammed, a muffled curse. The officers exchanged a look. "Is she aware we're here?" "Not yet," I said, "but she will be." They followed me into the living room, where the morning light made everything look sharper, almost sterile. The air smelled faintly of last night's roast and disinfectant. The framed photographs on the mantel, Daniel's graduation, our wedding anniversary, a younger me with her arms full of peonies, looked like artifacts from another life. Then Fiona appeared on the staircase, barefoot, disheveled, wrapped in Daniel's robe. She froze when she saw the uniforms. "What the hell is this?" Her voice cracked. Half disbelief, half contempt. I took a sip of tea before answering. "You may answer their questions, Fiona." Her face went pale. "You called the police on your own family?" "No," I said calmly. "I called the police on my attacker." Daniel came rushing down behind, her shirt half buttoned, confusion still fogging his eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" The younger officer cleared his throat. "Sir, your mother filed a report. We just need statements from everyone involved." Fiona scoffed. "This is insane. I tripped. The glass slipped. She's twisting everything because she can't stand me." The older officer flipped open his notebook. "Ma'am, you allegedly said something before the incident." Her tone turned sharp. "I was joking." He didn't look convinced. "What exactly did you say?" Fiona hesitated. I watched her jaw tighten, then relax into a practiced smirk. Something about respect. She took it out of context. Daniel's head snapped toward me. "Mom, please, this isn't necessary. You could ruin everything over one stupid argument." I set the cup down gently, porcelain against wood. "She threw a glass at my face, Daniel." His eyes darted between us. "You're exaggerating." The older officer interrupted. "Sir, we saw the photos. That's not an exaggeration." Daniel's voice dropped. "Mom, don't ruin our marriage." For a moment, the room went absolutely still. The sound of the clock ticking filled the silence, slow and deliberate. I looked at my son, the same boy who once hid behind my apron when thunder scared him, and realized how far apart we had drifted. He wasn't protecting his wife. He was protecting the illusion that everything was fine. "I'm not ruining your marriage," I said softly. "I'm refusing to let someone destroy my dignity in my own home." The words landed heavier than I intended. Fiona flinched. Daniel's mouth opened and then closed again. The younger officer stepped forward. "Mrs. Clayborne, would you like to press charges formally?" I nodded once. "Yes." Fiona's laughter was sharp and hollow. "This is ridiculous. You think this will hold up? It's her word against mine." "Actually," said the older officer, flipping through the folder, "it's her word, medical photos, time-stamped evidence, and your fingerprints on the stem of the glass." Color drained from Fiona's face. She turned to Daniel, desperate. "You're just going to let her do this?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, something inside me hardened. "Please," Fiona whispered, voice trembling now. "Daniel, say something." He finally spoke, but not to her. "Mom, please, just drop it. We can fix this privately." "Privately?" I repeated, almost tasting the word. "You mean quietly, like every other time you watched her humiliate me and said nothing." The young officer looked away, embarrassed to witness the collapse of something sacred. Fiona's voice cracked again. "You'll regret this. You're an old woman with no one left. Who do you think will take care of you?" I met her eyes. "Myself." The older officer gave a small nod to his partner. "Let's go, ma'am." "You can contact us through this card for updates." Fiona tried to pull free, but the officers kept their grip firm, guiding her toward the door. The sound of the front latch opening was oddly final. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Daniel turned to me. His voice was low, shaking. "You called the police on my wife." I met his stare. "She assaulted me in my home. That's a crime, not a family issue." He blinked as if I'd struck him, then walked out, following her. The front door shut hard behind them, rattling the frame. I stood still, listening to the echo fade. My hands didn't tremble. My pulse didn't quicken. Only the faint scent of jasmine from my tea lingered, sweet and calm, as if mocking the chaos that had just left the house. Outside, an engine started. Tires crunched on gravel. Silence returned. Dense, absolute. I walked to the window and looked out. The patrol car turned the corner, sunlight bouncing off its roof. Behind it, Daniel's car followed like a shadow chasing guilt. For the first time in years, I locked the front door, not to keep danger out, but to keep my resolve in. The house exhaled, as if relieved. I went back to the kitchen, poured what was left of my tea, and stood there until it grew cold. The evidence folder remained on the table, edges perfectly aligned. Beside it, the bruise on my cheek throbbed in rhythm with the clock's tick, a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers, "Enough." The sound of the closing door still echoed through the walls long after the patrol car disappeared. I stood alone in the entryway, holding the edge of the table as if steadying myself against invisible waves. The morning sun had moved higher now, filling the house with a light too clean, too revealing. Every corner looked raw, like a wound beginning to breathe. The living room was silent, stripped of voices. The air carried the faint trace of Fiona's perfume, synthetic and heavy, clinging to the drapes like arrogance refusing to leave. Somewhere beneath it lingered the sharper scent of red wine, soaked deep into the grain of the dining table. No amount of polish would take it out. I took a cloth and began wiping the surface anyway, slow and circular, the way I used to clean the counters at the flower shop after closing. There was something comforting in the repetition. Wipe, rinse, dry. Each motion is a quiet negotiation between memory and will. The faint crimson stain refused to disappear. It stayed there, ghost-like, a reminder of the glass that shattered, of the word "maid" hissed across candlelight. I pressed harder until my wrist ached, then stopped. Some stains, I thought, aren't meant to vanish. They're meant to remind me. I opened the drawer beside the hutch and found an old wooden box, small with a faded engraving of lilies on the lid. Raymond had carved it for me on our 5th anniversary. I ran my finger along the grooves, feeling the indent where time had softened. The edges. It once held ribbon scraps and pressed petals. Now it would hold something else. Carefully, I went to the counter where the evidence bags still lay in their precise row. I opened one and took out a few pieces of the broken glass. The edges were duller now, but they still caught light in shards of blue and silver. One by one, I placed them inside the box. When I finished, I took the black marker I had used the night before and wrote across the lid in neat, deliberate letters, "For when I forget my worth." The ink bled slightly into the wood grain, turning the words soft around the edges, like something whispered rather than declared. I sat down again, staring at the box. There was a strange calm in me now, not triumph, not sorrow, just stillness, a kind of peace that comes after you've stopped pretending that silence is forgiveness. On the mantel, the clock ticked in its measured rhythm. The sound filled the empty house, marking seconds that no longer belonged to anyone else. I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The faint hiss of water against metal felt like a companion. When the flame caught under the pot, the small blue light flickered against my hands, painting them in motion. I waited, breathing with the rhythm of the kettle's growing murmur. When the whistle finally rose, I didn't rush. I poured slowly, watching the water swirl over the tea leaves. The steam lifted, silver white, catching the sunlight through the window. It made tiny galaxies in the air, here for a second, gone the next. I set the cup on the counter, both hands wrapped around it. The warmth seeped into my palms, into the ache behind my knuckles. And there, in that quiet, my thoughts became clear. Kindness, when mocked, turns into clarity. It wasn't a line from a book or a phrase I'd read online. It arrived from somewhere inside, like truth that had been waiting for its turn to speak. I sipped the tea and let the words echo through me. They weren't angry. They were awake. I thought of Daniel, his face when he said, "Don't ruin our marriage." He believed that loyalty meant silence, that love meant endurance. But love, I had learned, without boundaries becomes servitude. The house creaked under a passing breeze. A curtain moved, its hem brushing the window ledge where my old photographs stood. One of them, a picture of me and Daniel when he was 10, had fallen sideways. I picked it up and set it upright again. His small arms were wrapped around my waist, his smile missing a front tooth. I traced the outline of his face with my finger. "You'll understand someday," I whispered. "Maybe not today, but someday." The words dissolved into the air. Outside, a sparrow landed on the porch railing, its feathers puffed against the cold. For a moment, it watched me through the glass, unafraid. I wondered if it could sense the difference in the house, the way stillness had replaced noise, the way calm had replaced performance. I finished my tea and washed the cup. The water ran clear, swirling down the drain like a quiet ending. The wooden box still sat on the table. I picked it up, feeling its weight. A small box, but heavy with meaning. I placed it on the top shelf of the cabinet beside Raymond's photo, where the morning light could find it each day. Then I opened the window. The air outside was brisk and smelled faintly of rain. I let it in. The curtains lifted, breathing for the house, as if reminding it that oxygen was forgiveness, not forgetting. I stood there for a long moment, watching the sunlight crawl across the floorboards, inching toward the chair where Fiona had sat the night before. The light reached it now, illuminating the faint smear of wine she'd spilled. It glowed red, then faded as the sun shifted. I took a deep breath. For the first time since last night, I realized I was hungry. Not for food, but for something gentler. For my own company, perhaps. For the peace that comes from knowing you did not have to shout to be heard. I boiled the kettle again, this time for fresh tea. As I poured, the steam rose once more, soft and ghostly. It caught the light differently now, no longer pale and cold, but warmer, tinted gold by the angle of the sun. I watched it twist upward and whispered quietly to the air, almost like a prayer. May I never mistake quiet for weakness again. Then I sat at the table, the one that had witnessed both cruelty and courage, and took my first sip of peace. The next morning, the sound that woke me wasn't the kettle or the birds or the familiar groan of the wooden stairs, the drawers opening and closing, and the hollow scrape of a suitcase being dragged across the floor. I didn't move right away. I just listened. Each thud carried the rhythm of a decision already made. When I finally walked to the hallway, Daniel was standing at the foot of the stairs, surrounded by half-packed bags. His shoulders slumped under a weight I couldn't lift for him. The bruise on my cheek had turned a dull violet, matching the exhaustion in his eyes. He didn't look up when he said, "I'm going to stay with Fiona for a while." The words didn't surprise me, but they still stung. They were careful words, like stepping stones placed across a river, meant to avoid getting wet. "You don't have to," I replied quietly. He kept folding shirts into a suitcase, his movements too controlled. "I do. She's my wife." "And I'm your mother," I said. He stopped mid-fold, the fabric hanging loose in his hands. For a moment, the house held its breath. He looked up at me then, eyes glassy, searching, almost pleading. "You've always judged her, Mom, from the beginning." I exhaled slowly, measuring every word before it left my mouth. "I never judged her, Daniel. I only judged silence when it hid cruelty." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand her. She's under pressure. She's been dealing with so much. Work, finances, expectations. You've never had to worry about those things." A bitter smile flickered across my face before I could stop it. "Haven't I?" He looked confused, almost defensive. I gestured toward the table, toward the quiet proof of all the nights I'd worked after your father's death. Paper bills, closed accounts, calloused hands. "You were too young to see it then," I said, "but every flower arrangement, every rent check, every meal on that table came from pressure, Daniel. I just never made you carry it." He looked away, guilt brushing his face like a passing shadow. "This isn't about that. Fiona needs support right now. She's scared. She's not the only one." He turned sharply, his voice rising for the first time. "She made a mistake. People make mistakes, Mom. You didn't have to call the police." There it was, the crack in his voice. The child still buried beneath the man. I took a step closer. If she'd thrown that glass at someone else, at a stranger in a restaurant, at her boss, would you still call it a mistake? Or would you call it what it is? He blinked, his breath unsteady. "It's different. She's family." "No," I said softly. "That's what makes it worse." He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "I didn't raise you to confuse loyalty with blindness," I continued. "Love doesn't mean protecting someone from consequences. It means helping them face them." His voice broke then, quieter, fragile. "She said you'll never forgive her, that you want her gone." "I don't need to forgive her," I said. "Forgiveness belongs to those who ask for it. She hasn't." He zipped the suitcase shut, the sound harsh and final. "Then maybe I should go before this gets worse." I watched as he lifted the bag, his knuckles white against the handle. He walked past me toward the door. I followed slowly, each step echoing through the empty hall like footsteps in a church. At the threshold, he hesitated. "You could still drop the charges." "I could," I said, "but I won't." "Why?" "Because if I do," I answered, "she'll think she can do it again, to you, to someone else. And because somewhere deep down, you'd start believing she was right to do it." He shook his head, his eyes glistening. "You've changed." "I haven't," I said. "I just stopped apologizing for being strong." We stood there, mother and son, separated by something that couldn't be seen but could be felt, like air before a storm. "Goodbye, Mom," he whispered. I wanted to say I love you, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded. He opened the door. The morning light poured in, blinding and white. He stepped through it, the suitcase wheels bumping over the porch steps. The moment he crossed the gate, I felt the house exhale again, half grief, half relief. Through the window, I watched him load his bag into the back seat. His movements were mechanical, deliberate, as if efficiency could erase pain. Then he got into the car. Fiona was waiting in the passenger seat. She didn't look at me, though she must have known I was watching. Her sunglasses covered more than her eyes. They hid her satisfaction. The engine started. For a brief second, Daniel looked up toward the window as though he might wave, or change his mind. He didn't. The car reversed, gravel crunching under the tires, and then it was gone. The sound of the engine lingered in the air, low and dissolving, until even that faded into silence. I stood in the doorway long after the dust settled. The house around me felt bigger now, its emptiness expanding like breath. In the dining room, 2 chairs sat opposite each other, one with a faint mark of wine on the backrest, the other perfectly clean. I touched the empty chair beside mine and pulled it closer to the table, then stopped halfway, realizing how pointless the gesture was. The clock struck 9. Each chime felt slower than the last. I walked to the living room, picking up the small details that betrayed their absence: a coffee mug, a jacket over the sofa, a pair of keys left behind. The scent of them was still everywhere: cologne, wine, perfume, the ghost of family life. For a moment, I wanted to call out his name, but my voice stayed in my chest. I stood in the doorway and let the stillness speak instead. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded, sharp and fleeting. Then nothing. Slowly, I began to close the door. The hinges groaned, resisting at first, then yielding. As the door met the frame, I pressed my hand against it, holding it there, not to keep anyone out, but to steady myself. Through the glass pane, the light fractured into soft lines across the floor. Dust floated through them, spinning slowly in the air like tiny fragments of something once whole. I whispered to the silence, "He'll understand one day." Then I turned the deadbolt. The sound was small but absolute. I stood for a long while after that, watching the last trace of exhaust drift away down the street, thinking how strange it was that endings never sounded like what they were supposed to. They didn't crash, they didn't scream, they just closed softly, like a door you've learned to lock, not out of anger, but out of love, for what must stay safe. 3 days after Daniel left, Marianne came by again, her posture brisk, her perfume faint but familiar. She set her briefcase on my kitchen counter the way one sets down a burden they've carried too long. "I brought someone I think you should meet," she said. Behind her stepped a man in his late 50s, tall but slightly stooped, the kind of presence that filled a room quietly. His suit was worn but pressed, his eyes sharp under heavy brows. He carried no notebook, no laptop, just a small leather folder and a steady gaze. "This is Leo Harper," Marianne said. "He's a private investigator, used to be with the Charleston Police Department before he retired. He's discreet." Leo nodded politely. "Mrs. Clayborne." "Ursula, please," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" He smiled faintly. "If you're making a pot." We sat at the table where everything had happened, the same table I had scrubbed clean, though the grain still held shadows of what couldn't be erased. Marianne opened her files, the crisp paper cutting through the quiet. "Ursula," she began, "Leo has access to databases that can help us trace any financial activity under Daniel's name. You mentioned Fiona handled most of their accounts?" Yes, I said. He trusted her with everything. Leo leaned forward slightly. Do you have his full name, date of birth, and social security number? I did. Of course I did. I handed him a sheet of paper I'd already prepared. My instincts as a record keeper had never failed me. Order was how I survived chaos. He scanned it, nodded once, then spoke in a tone that suggested he'd already seen too many versions of this story. These cases usually start with small, joint accounts, shared passwords, and automatic payments. It's easy to blur the line between trust and control. His words felt like a mirror. I saw my son in them, his soft eyes, his quiet compliance, the way he bent himself to please everyone but himself. Leo pulled out his phone, typed something, then waited. Marianne and I sat in silence while the kettle began to hum on the stove. The faint whistle rose just as his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, frowned slightly, then turned it toward us. You said Daniel's a veterinarian, right? Average salary, modest savings? I nodded. He's careful with money. Always has been. Leo's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped lower. Then this will sting. He slid the phone across the table. On the screen were lines of data, cold and precise. Multiple accounts under Daniel's name. 3 credit cards, a personal loan, and a line of credit opened just 2 months ago. The total balance, $203,000. My breath caught in my throat, but my face didn't move. I'd learned long ago that composure was armor. Marianne exhaled. My God, it's all in her handwriting. Leo nodded. Same address, same phone number, same signature pattern. Classic case of identity fraud within marriage. She forged access to his details and built a debt mountain under his name. I traced one of the printed numbers on the page with my fingertip. 203,427. It looked so ordinary, so exact, like it belonged in someone else's story. What happens when the bills come due? I asked quietly. Leo met my eyes. They already have. The lenders will contact Daniel first. Then they'll threaten legal action. By the time he realizes what's happening, she'll be long gone. Marianne placed a hand on my arm. We can intervene before that. Leo can pull the full records, prove the fraud, and alert the bank's fraud division, but we'll need Daniel's cooperation eventually. I nodded slowly. He's not ready to see it yet. Then we gather everything, Marianne said. Every document, every receipt, every signature. When the time comes, he'll see the truth laid out so clearly, he won't be able to deny it. Leo leaned back, folding his hands. If I may ask, Mrs. Clayborne, why are you so calm? I looked at him, then at the kettle's faint steam curling against the morning light. Because rage clouds judgment, I said, and I've spent a lifetime learning how to see clearly through storms. He smiled faintly. That's rare. As we spoke, a memory came uninvited. Soft, sunlit, tender. Daniel was 5 years old, sitting cross-legged on the shop floor with a bundle of carnations and an expression of intense concentration. His little hands trembled as he tried to tie a ribbon around the stems. Too tight, I'd said gently. You'll choke them. He loosened the knot, frowning. But if I make it loose, it falls apart. I'd smiled then, dipping my finger into a vase of water and letting a drop fall onto a petal. That's why you have to water them just right. Not too much, not too little. He'd looked up at me, confused but listening. Like people? I nodded. Exactly like people. That memory, small as it was, bloomed in the silence between us now. I could still smell the flowers, the faint trace of soil and sunlight. Back then, love meant protection. Now I understood it also meant boundaries. Leo cleared his throat softly, pulling me back to the present. I'll have a full report for you within 48 hours. With this evidence, we can approach the authorities or the bank directly. Your call. Send it to me, I said. Not to Daniel, not yet. Marianne looked at me carefully. You're planning something. I gave a faint, almost weary smile. Not revenge, Marianne, just the truth. Served neatly with documentation. Leo zipped his folder closed. Truth can be sharp, you know, sharper than any weapon. I'm aware, I said. but I've learned to hold sharp things carefully. They left an hour later. The house, once again, folded into silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It was focused, alert, like still water before a ripple. I sat by the window with my tea and the printed pages Leo had left behind. Outside, the hydrangeas were drooping slightly, thirsty after days without rain. I thought about watering them, but then remembered something my mother used to say. Sometimes the soil must dry a little before it can truly drink again. I folded the papers neatly into a file labeled Case Fiona and slid it into the drawer beside the wooden box of glass shards. 2 relics of the same story, one emotional, one factual. I looked at the box again, the inscription catching a glint of sunlight. For when I forget my worth. Not this time, I thought. I poured another cup of tea, letting the steam rise between me and the window. Through it, the garden blurred into soft greens and golds. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass, older, steadier, unbroken. As the kettle clicked off behind me, I whispered the lesson aloud, as if reminding both the flowers and myself. Love, like water, must be given just enough. Too little, it withers. Too much, it drowns. Daniel called on a Thursday morning. His voice was quiet, almost formal. Can we talk? We agreed to meet at the cafe near the harbor, the same one where I used to bring him after school for hot cocoa and almond cookies. Back then, his legs barely reached the floor and he'd swing them as he told me about math tests and baseball. I used to think that sound, the tap of his shoes against the chair, was the happiest rhythm in the world. Now the cafe felt smaller, or maybe I'd just grown tired of carrying too much memory inside one room. He was already there when I arrived, same table, same corner. Only the boy was gone, replaced by a man with hollow eyes and a coffee gone cold in front of him. "Mom," he said softly, standing as I approached. "You look better." "I am," I said. "How are you?" He didn't answer, just sat down and rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit from childhood. I placed the folder on the table between us, brown leather neatly clasped. His eyes darted to it. "What's that?" "Truth," I said simply. He frowned. "Please, not another lecture." "Not a lecture," I replied. "A record." I unlatched the folder and spread out the documents, printouts, receipts, scanned signatures, and one line of numbers that froze him in place. $203,000, I said evenly, all taken under your name. He stared at the paper. "No, that's impossible." "It isn't," I said. Leo Harper, a retired detective, traced every transaction. The applications were filled from your home network with Fiona's device ID. The signatures are hers. He blinked rapidly, as if the air had turned too thick to breathe. "She wouldn't—" "She did." He shook his head. "You're wrong. There must be some mistake. She told me she was consolidating her accounts. Maybe it looks bad, but..." I slid a photograph across the table. Fiona's handwriting, Fiona's email address, Fiona's signature. His voice cracked. "Stop." I didn't. The first loan was in April, then another in June. She used your credit to pay off her mother's gambling debts. There are transfers, Daniel, receipts, it's all here. He looked at the papers as if they were foreign objects. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Then slowly, he whispered, "She said she was fixing things, that she needed time." "She wasn't fixing them," I said. "She was hiding them. In your name." He slumped back in his chair, eyes glassy. For a moment, he looked 10 years old again, lost, fragile, desperate to believe something that wasn't true. The cafe noise faded, cups clinked distantly, and somewhere a milk frother hissed. But between us, there was only silence. He finally asked, almost in a whisper, "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need you to see what love can become when it stops being kind," I said. "And because denial doesn't protect you, it traps you." He pressed his palms to his eyes. "I thought you hated her." "No," I said quietly. "I pitied her. There's a difference." He lowered his hands. "I can't believe she'd hurt me like this." I hesitated. Then gently, I said, "She already has." He looked up sharply, confused. That's when I saw it. A faint bruise at the edge of his collarbone just below the jawline, subtle but unmistakable. The shape wasn't random, it was a thumbprint. My breath caught. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to your neck?" He froze. His eyes darted away. "It's nothing." I reached across the table, my hand trembling slightly. "It doesn't look like nothing." He swallowed hard. "We argued. She threw something. It hit me, that's all." My heart clenched. I waited before speaking, letting the weight of it settle. "That's not all, Daniel." He looked down at his hands, fingers twitching, the same way they used to when he'd drop a flower pot as a boy and couldn't admit it. "You don't understand, Mom. She apologizes afterward. She cries, says she's sorry, says it's the stress." I kept my hand on the table, palm open, not pushing, not prying, just steady. "And you believe her?" He was silent. "She said you were too soft," I continued quietly. "That's what she said the night she threw the glass." "Maids must obey." He winced, as though the memory itself hurt him. "She's not evil," he said weakly. "She just loses control sometimes." "So did your father," I said softly, "when the world broke his heart. But he never used pain as proof of love." Daniel looked at me then, tears trembling in his eyes. "What am I supposed to do?" "Start by seeing it," I said. His voice cracked. "I can't leave her. She'll fall apart." I leaned forward, lowering my tone until it was barely audible. "And if you stay, you'll be the one who falls apart." He didn't answer. He just stared at the papers, at the numbers, at the evidence of betrayal he couldn't unsee. The steam from my untouched tea drifted upward between us, curling in slow spirals. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and grief. After a long silence, I reached across the table and brushed my fingers gently against the bruise on his neck. He flinched, but didn't pull away. My voice shook, but I said it anyway, slow, deliberate, each word carrying its own truth. "Abuse hides in love's shadow, Daniel, always has. That's why it's so hard to notice until it's too late." His shoulders collapsed inward, a man folding under the weight of realization. His tears hit the table, one by one, like rain against old wood. I didn't comfort him. Not the way mothers usually do, with shushing and promises that everything would be fine. Instead, I let the silence hold him, the same way I used to hold him when he was small and crying for reasons he couldn't name. When he finally looked up, his face was raw, stripped of pretense. "What do I do now?" "You tell the truth," I said simply. "To yourself first, then to the law." He nodded slowly, as if every movement took effort. "I don't know if I can." "You can," I said, "because this time you're not alone." Outside, the harbor wind rattled the cafe windows. The sea shimmered under the noon light, endless and restless. For a moment, we both watched it, the vastness of it, the pull of something larger than pain. He exhaled, long and shaky. "You always did know when to water the flowers." I smiled faintly. "And when to let them find their own roots." The clock above the counter ticked softly. Somewhere, a bell rang for a new order. When he stood up, he looked different, not lighter, but anchored. He gathered the papers slowly, as if holding both evidence and closure. "I'll call you tonight," he said. I nodded. "I'll be here." He walked toward the door, sunlight catching the bruise as he turned. It glowed faintly gold, no longer hidden in shadow. Daniel came home on a Sunday. No grand announcement, no luggage beyond a single duffel bag, just a quiet knock at the door and a face that looked older than it should have. When I opened it, he stood there for a long moment, unsure if he was welcome. His voice cracked on the first word. "Mom." I didn't say anything. I simply stepped aside and let him in. The house seemed to breathe differently with him inside. The air shifted, like something lost had found its way back. His shoes left faint prints on the hardwood, tracing the path to a home that never stopped waiting for him. He looked around, eyes lingering on the small things, the photos, the worn rug, the faint smell of lavender polish. "Everything's the same," he whispered. "Some things shouldn't have to change," I said. He nodded but didn't meet my eyes. "I don't know how long I can stay." "Stay as long as you need," I said. "There's no clock running here." When he went upstairs, I followed him quietly, stopping at the door of his old room. Dust had gathered on the windowsill, and the curtains had lost their crispness. But the bones of the space were still his, the wooden desk scarred from years of homework, the faded baseball cap on the shelf, the lamp with the slightly crooked shade. I pulled the sheets off the bed, shaking out the quiet years that had settled there. Fresh linen, a soft, clean scent of jasmine. I opened the window to let the light in. It poured across the room like honey, thick and golden, catching the small motes of dust as they danced in the air. Daniel stood at the doorway, watching. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," I said, tucking in the corners of the bedspread, "but I wanted to." He sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders heavy, head bowed. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft rustle of the curtain in the breeze. Then, almost to himself, he said, "It smells like home." The words hit me deeper than he could have known, not because of nostalgia, but because of what they meant, that he remembered safety not as perfection, but as peace. I went downstairs and brought up a tray with 2 cups of tea, same blend we used to drink when he was little, black tea with a slice of orange peel. The scent filled the room, warm and familiar. When I set the tray on the nightstand, he noticed the teapot. It was porcelain, white with faint blue vines curling along its handle. A small crack ran down its side, sealed with fine golden resin. "I didn't know you still had that," he said, smiling faintly. "I almost threw it away once," I admitted, "but it still holds water, so I keep using it." He ran his fingers lightly along the crack. "It's beautiful." "It wasn't always," I said. "It took breaking to make it that way." He looked at me then, understanding it was dawning slowly, the kind that doesn't need words to settle in. I poured the tea, and the sound of it filled the quiet, a low, steady rhythm like rain on old wood. He took a sip, inhaled deeply, and exhaled with something like relief. I didn't realize how exhausted I was. "You've been surviving," I said softly. "That's not the same as living." He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. I thought if I just kept her calm, things would get better. Maybe love could fix everything. I reached for my cup. The heat of the porcelain warmed my hands. Love can't fix what refuses to be honest. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is stop letting them hurt you. He looked away, blinking hard. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup again. "You think I'm weak?" I shook my head. "No, Daniel, I think you're human." The light from the window shifted, laying gold across his face. For the first time in months, I saw a trace of the boy he once was, the one who used to build forts from sofa cushions and laugh so loudly it shook the walls. He caught me smiling. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just glad you're here." He gave a small, shy smile in return. "Me too." The clock downstairs chimed at noon. Outside, the wind rustled through the hydrangeas, the petals brushing against the window glass like a soft knock. I stood and walked to the dresser, where I'd placed a folded blanket earlier that morning. My fingers brushed against the wooden box on the shelf, the one with the shards of glass inside. I didn't open it. Some reminders don't need to be seen to be remembered. When I turned back, Daniel was staring at the teapot again, watching the way the light caught the golden seam. "It's funny," he said. "It's cracked, but somehow stronger now." "Maybe that's how we're built," I said quietly, "to hold more after we've been broken." He looked down at his cup. The steam had thinned, but the warmth lingered. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not giving up on me." "I never did," I said. "I just waited for you to remember who you are." He smiled, small and unsteady, but real. "Maybe I'll stay longer than I thought." "Good," I said. "There's room here for both healing and quiet." We sat in silence again, not the heavy kind from before, but the easy kind that lives between people who have nothing left to prove. As the sunlight deepened into late afternoon, I noticed how the crack in the teapot glowed faintly gold where the resin caught the light. I thought of how fragile it once was, how carefully I'd glued it back together, terrified it might leak again. It never did. I reached for the pot to pour one last cup, and my hands didn't shake. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Not mending what's broken, but learning to pour anyway. It happened just after midnight. The kind of silence that belongs only to sleeping houses hung over everything. The clock downstairs had just struck 12. The night air was still, the moonlight pale against the curtains. Daniel was asleep in the guest room. I had been reading by the soft lamplight, the kind of reading you do not to learn, but to keep the mind steady. Then the knocking started. At first it was light, hesitant, a tap, then another. Then, like a switch flipped, it grew frantic, fists pounding against the wood. I froze for a second, listening. Then came the voice, hoarse, slurred, desperate. "Open the door, Ursula. You can't just take him away from me. Do you hear me?" Fiona. Her words sliced through the quiet like shattered glass. I stood up slowly, my pulse steady despite the noise. I moved to the window, pulled the curtain back just an inch. There she was, on the porch, barefoot, hair tangled, mascara running in streaks down her face. The porch light illuminated her like a ghost that hadn't learned it was no longer welcome. Behind her, the car sat crooked in the driveway, headlights still on. She banged the door again. "He's mine! You can't hide him from me, Daniel!" I didn't move closer. I didn't speak. I only reached for the small button on the wall, the one that activated the security cameras. The red light blinked once, quiet and unblinking, recording everything. Then I picked up the phone and dialed. "Charleston Police, what's your emergency?" "This is Ursula Clayborne," I said evenly. "I have a restraining order against Fiona Clayborne. She's on my property. She's trying to break in." "Stay inside, ma'am," the dispatcher said calmly. "Units are en route. Do not engage." "Understood." I placed the phone on the counter and turned off the lights. The house fell into a soft blue half-darkness. Down the hall, I heard Daniel's door open. He appeared in the hallway, his hair messy, eyes wide with sleep and confusion. "Mom, what's happening?" I raised my hand in silence. "She's outside." He froze. The sound of fists on the door grew louder. "Daniel!" she screamed. "Don't you dare ignore me!" He took a step toward the stairs, but I caught his wrist before he could move further. "No!" His voice broke. She sounds like she's falling apart." "Let her," I said softly. He stared at me, torn between fear and habit, the urge to fix what could no longer be fixed. "I can't just let her—" "You can," I interrupted gently, "and you will." He hesitated, trembling. Outside, Fiona's voice cracked into sobs, then fury, then back to pleading. "Please, Daniel, please, I didn't mean it. I just need to see you." The sound of her palm slapping the glass echoed through the night. I felt him flinch beside me. He whispered, "I can't listen to this." "Yes, you can," I said, "because this time you'll hear the truth in it." He turned toward me then, his eyes wet, his chest rising and falling too fast. "She's not always like this," he whispered. "She gets better sometimes. Daniel," I said quietly, my voice steady as a metronome, "you've been measuring her storms by the moment she lets you breathe." He blinked, as if the words physically struck him. His lips trembled. I thought love meant staying. "Love means safety," I said. "Anything else is captivity." Outside, the sound changed. Footsteps on gravel, the low hum of a car engine pulling up. Blue light began to flash through the curtains, strobes of calm authority painting the walls in rhythmic pulses. Through the window, I saw 2 officers approach. Fiona was still shouting, her voice raw now, breaking apart with every sentence. They spoke to her gently at first. She screamed something I couldn't hear. One officer reached out his hand. She jerked away. Then, slowly, inevitably, the scene shifted. She stopped fighting. Her shoulders sagged. They led her toward the patrol car. From inside, all we saw were the shadows. Her silhouette bending under the flashing lights, the faint metallic sound of the car door closing. The porch was quiet again. I turned back toward Daniel. His face was pale, tears streaking his cheeks. His body shook. the tremor of adrenaline and heartbreak colliding. I took his hand just as I used to when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. My fingers closed around his, warm, steady. "She's gone," I said softly. He nodded, but his breath was uneven. "It doesn't feel real." "It will," I said. He looked at me, eyes searching. "You didn't even shout. You didn't go out there. You didn't—" I squeezed his hand. "Justice doesn't need volume, Daniel. Only timing." He swallowed hard, the meaning settling slowly. Outside, the blue light still pulsed, reflecting against the windows. Soft, flickering, rhythmic. They painted the walls with light that looked almost like water, washing the night clean. When the car drove away, the house exhaled. We stood there for a long time, just breathing, his hand in mine, the echo of her voice fading into memory. In the quiet that followed, I poured us both glasses of water. He drank his in silence, staring at nothing. I could tell he was trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the chaos she left behind. "Will she be okay?" he asked finally. "She will face what she made," I said. "That's the first step to okay." He nodded, slow and small. Then after a pause, he whispered, "Thank you for not opening the door." I smiled faintly. That's how we stay free. The porch light flickered once before going out completely, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the heartbeat of our breathing. I walked to the window one last time. The street was empty now, washed clean by the flashing lights that had come and gone. The night had returned to stillness, and in that stillness, I heard something I hadn't in a long time. Peace, fragile but real, like glass that had finally stopped breaking. Morning returned like a promise I did not trust. After the night of blue lights and silence, the house felt rinsed and hollow, as if peace had washed through but left its outline behind. Daniel was still asleep. I brewed tea, checked the latch twice, then heard a slow, deliberate knock, the kind that belonged to truth, not visitors. Leo Harper stood at my porch with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. His eyes were kind, but his jaw carried the weight of hard knowledge. "May I come in, Mrs. Clayborne?" "Ursula," I said. "Yes, come in." We sat at the kitchen table. The wooden box of glass shards glimmered faintly from the cabinet, as if listening. Leo laid the envelope down, squared its edges, and exhaled. "I have the report," he said. "It's thorough." "Thorough is mercy," I replied. "It spares us from illusion." He opened the file and began. 2 prior cases. Atlanta, 5 years ago. Domestic battery reduced to disorderly conduct. Dallas, 3 years later. Fraud and harassment, settled quietly. Same pattern, same charm, same wreckage. He pointed to names, bank statements, screenshots. She knows how to rewrite narratives. That's what makes her dangerous. I stared at the table. My pulse stayed steady, but the air thickened. Go on. She built debt in others' names, moved states before claims were filed. I cross-referenced aliases. There's a match. He slid a printed page toward me. It's her handwriting. I studied the loops and slants of her signature. Elegant, practiced, cruel. She repeats herself like a hymn, I murmured. Leo nodded. Patterns are their own confession. I said nothing. Somewhere outside, a bird struck the window and flew off, leaving only the echo. Footsteps on the stairs. Daniel entered, still drowsy. His face softened when he saw Leo, but stiffened at the folder. Is that about her? Yes, I said. You should see it. He hesitated, then sat. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. Cities, charges, lies. Every sheet was another fracture he had to absorb. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I thought I was the first to fail her. No, Leo said gently. You're only the first to learn from it. Daniel closed the file and pressed his palms on it as though pinning down a living thing. So, all those apologies were rehearsals, I said. He nodded slowly. I guess she's been playing this part for a long time. Leo stood. I'll file this with the division. They'll move forward now. You two should rest. When the door closed behind him, the house felt smaller. Daniel stared at nothing. I thought love could fix people, he whispered. "So did I said. He looked at me, eyes rimmed red. "Then what fixes us?" "Truth," I said. "Even when it breaks the picture we wanted to keep." He rose, went upstairs without another word. I carried the teacups to the sink, turned the water on, and let it run over my hands. Cool first, then hot. The sound filled the room like memory itself. How many times had I stood at this sink, forgiving in silence? How many times have I mistaken exhaustion for compassion? I watched the water glide down my fingers, clear, relentless, merciful. And I asked myself, how many times have I excused harm in the name of kinship and called it virtue? The question hit hard, not for what it accused, but for what it unveiled. I shut off the tap. The last drops fell one by one, like punctuation marks in a confession. In the mirror above the sink, my reflection looked unfamiliar, older but cleaner somehow. Behind me, Daniel said softly, "Mom?" I turned. He stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, expression half boy, half man. "I need to tell you something," I said. "It's about your father." His eyes widened. "What about him?" "You know he died of heart failure," I said. "That's true, but not the whole truth." He stepped closer. "What do you mean?" I gripped the edge of the counter. "Before he died, the shop was struggling. He borrowed money to keep us afloat. He hid it from me at first, then from you. When he passed, the debts didn't. I sold everything, the car, my jewelry. I took extra work. I made sure you never saw the bills. I wanted you to believe your father left you something better than burden." He blinked slowly. "You lied to protect him?" "And to protect you," I said. "You were 16. I thought sparing you the truth was love. But love that hides too much becomes deceit." He looked down at the floor. "So all those years, you were paying for him." "I was paying for peace," I said, "and peace on false terms doesn't last." He looked up again, pain and realization colliding in his face. "Why tell me now?" "Because you deserve to know the story without the sugarcoat," I said. "Your father tried to shield me. I tried to shield you. And in doing so, we built a house of glass. Beautiful, fragile, dishonest." Daniel's voice trembled. "You think I'm like him?" I shook my head. "You're his continuation and my correction. You have his heart, but you can learn my restraint." He smiled faintly, tears tracing down his face. "You always speak like you're teaching me how to breathe, Mom." "Maybe I am," I said. He reached out and held my hand across the counter. His grip was warm, unsteady. "You carried too much for too long." "So did your father," I said softly. "He thought love meant shielding me from every bruise. I thought love meant shielding you from every truth. Both kinds of love kept us blind." We stood there in silence, the kind that doesn't sting anymore. The kettle clicked, as if reminding us that even water has its breaking point before turning to steam. 2 generations of quiet endurance stood side by side in that kitchen. His father's debts, my silence, Daniel's forgiveness, all versions of devotion that mistook pain for purpose. He broke the silence first. "What do we do with it now?" "We remember," I said. "And we stop calling sacrifice by the wrong name." He nodded, his eyes glinting with something close to peace. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. The water ran again, this time steady and calm. I cupped it in my hands, let it slip through. The mirror fogged lightly. There, I spoke aloud, to the woman I'd become, to the girl I once was. No more rescues that erase me, no more forgiveness that blinds him. The woman in the mirror didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. When I stepped back into the kitchen, Daniel was sitting with the folder closed, his fingers resting on its cover, not in fear this time, but in ownership. I smiled faintly. "We move forward," I said. He nodded. "Together." The clock ticked toward noon. The air smelled of steeped tea and rain-soaked earth. And for the first time in years, the truth sat with us, unhidden, unashamed, quietly alive. Healing doesn't arrive. Like thunder, it comes as a whisper. It's the sound of a brush dipping into paint water, the low hum of a laptop starting again, the quiet rhythm of breath finding its way back. 2 months had passed since that night. The restraining order became permanent. Fiona disappeared from the edges of our lives like a shadow at noon, visible for a moment, then gone. Daniel began therapy the week after Leo's report. At first, he resisted, the way men often resist softness when they've been taught that silence is strength. But his counselor, a patient woman with silver hair and the calm of a tide pool, taught him how to name things out loud. Words became oxygen. Guilt lost its grip. I watched him change in small ways, the way he stood straighter, the way he paused before apologizing for existing, the way he smiled again without looking over his shoulder. And me? I opened my laptop one morning and reopened the flower shop's page. Clayborne Blooms, a small online store I'd abandoned years ago. The old logo still blinked in the corner, faded but intact. I uploaded photos of arrangements, hydrangeas, wild daisies, the same lilies that once lined my shop window when Raymond was still alive. Orders trickled in, neighbors, local weddings, even sympathy bouquets. The rhythm returned, trimming stems, wrapping ribbons, handwriting small notes that said, "Thinking of you." It felt like remembering a language I used to speak fluently. That afternoon, Daniel joined me in the garage, where we'd decided to repaint his old room. The walls had dulled over the years, a tired beige that belonged to absence. "What color?" he asked. "Sky," I said. He smiled. "You always pick blue. It's the only color that forgives everything beneath it." We laid out the drop cloth, stirred the paint, dipped our rollers into the tray. The first stroke landed on the wall, cool, clean, full of promise. Sunlight streamed through the open window, catching the soft mist from each stroke. For a while, we worked without words, the silence companionable. The faint scent of fresh paint filled the air, blending with the lemon tea I'd left on the sill. Then Daniel broke the quiet. "Mom?" "Yes?" He hesitated, eyes fixed on the wall. "How do you forgive?" I lowered my brush. The question hung between us like dust in sunlight. "I don't," I said softly. He looked at me, puzzled. "You don't?" "No," I said. "I simply stopped giving her the power to matter." He absorbed the words, rolling them around in his head the way a craftsman tests the balance of a tool. "That's not the same as forgiveness." "No," I agreed. "Forgiveness is a gift. This," I gestured around us, the blue spreading across the walls, "this is reclamation." He leaned against the ladder, breathing deeply. "Therapy calls that boundaries." "Boundaries," I repeated with a small smile. "A modern word for an ancient practice." He laughed quietly. "You always make things sound like scripture." "Maybe because truth repeats itself," I said. "We just forget the translation." We kept painting. The light shifted with the afternoon, amber now, softer. With each stroke, the room seemed to breathe fuller. After a while, Daniel said, "I used to think healing meant erasing everything, pretending it never happened." "It doesn't," I said. "Healing remembers but doesn't ache anymore." He nodded slowly. "You're good at that." "Only because I had to be." He set his roller down, his voice low. "You know, when Fiona left, I felt empty, like someone had scooped the air out of me. But lately, I feel—" He paused, searching for the word. "Spacious." "That's what happens when you stop renting yourself out to chaos." He chuckled softly, but his eyes glistened. "You should write that down." I shrugged. "It's already written, in the way we live now." We moved to the opposite wall. The strokes became slower, deliberate. He painted the upper half. I painted near the baseboards. Occasionally, our brushes crossed paths, leaving faint streaks that blended like fingerprints. When the last wall was covered, we stood back. The room glowed pale blue, almost like morning after a long rain. Daniel set his roller aside. "It looks new." "It looks honest," I said. We sat on the floor, legs stretched out, the drop cloth wrinkling beneath us. The air smelled of paint and tea. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, scattering sunlight across the floor. He leaned his head back against the wall. "Do you ever miss Dad?" "Every day," I said, "but I don't live inside that missing anymore." He nodded, silent. After a long pause, he said, "When I was little, I thought you were unshakable, like nothing could ever hurt you. And now? Now I know you're not unshakable," he said softly. "You just chose not to stay broken." The truth of it stung and soothed all at once. "That's all any of us can do," I said. "Break, learn, rebuild differently." He smiled, a real smile this time. "Maybe I'll keep the blue room after all." "You'd better," I said. "It suits you." He laughed. "Because I look good in melancholy?" "No," I said, smiling back. "Because it's the color of freedom." The clock downstairs chimed 5. The day had stretched quietly, without drama, just slow, steady repair. Later, I brought up dinner. Roasted vegetables, rice, 2 glasses of lemonade. We ate sitting on the floor, paint still on our hands. Every so often, our laughter echoed off the new walls. When the plates were empty, I looked around the room and said, "You know, when I opened the flower shop again, I thought I was doing it for money. Turns out I was doing it for air." He tilted his head. "Air? Creation is how we exhale," I said. "Otherwise, life just sits heavy inside." He looked thoughtful. "Then maybe therapy is my version of the shop." "Exactly," I said. We both found ways to breathe again. As evening settled, he stood and stretched. "You should rest, Mom." "I will," I said, but stayed seated, watching the last light fade across the blue walls. He turned off the overhead lamp, leaving only the amber from the hallway spilling through the doorway. Before leaving, he paused, his voice soft. "You're the strongest person I know." I smiled at the floor. "Strength isn't loud, Daniel. It's the sound of still being here." When he left, I sat in the dimness, running my hand along the cool wall. The paint was smooth, new, and faintly tacky to the touch. Still drying, still settling, I thought of the cracked teapot downstairs, the glass shards in the box, the endless cycles of breaking and mending, and I realized something simple but whole. Resilience isn't rebuilding what was. It's building something that can hold the new truth without collapsing. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive. And for the first time, so did I. A year passes quietly, the way dawn arrives, soft, unannounced, but undeniable. The hydrangeas in the garden bloom again, thicker this time. I prune them every morning, careful not to cut too deep. The house feels lighter now. Even the air moves differently through it. Daniel comes by every Sunday with a folder under his arm and a calm I've never seen before. His posture has changed. Not taller, just truer. Today, he's wearing a blue shirt, the same pale shade as the walls we painted together. "Ready?" he asks, standing at the door. "For what?" I tease. He smiles. "The conference." He's been invited to speak at a local symposium on domestic abuse, how victims can also be men, how silence can live behind kind faces. It's his first public speech. I pack a thermos of tea and a small bouquet of white roses. "For courage," I tell him. He laughs, shaking his head. "You're still the florist who sends love notes through petals. And you're still the boy who pretends not to believe in symbols," I reply. We drive together. The morning sun drips through the windshield, the world outside washed in gold. Daniel hums quietly along to the radio. The rhythm feels familiar, like the heartbeat of something rebuilt. At the venue, people gather in quiet clusters, survivors, counselors, families, advocates. The stage is simple. 1 microphone, 1 glass of water, a small vase of lilies. When Daniel's name is called, my hands tighten around the cup of tea I brought. He steps onto the stage, clears his throat, and begins. Not with statistics or definitions, but with honesty. "My name is Daniel Clayborne," he says, "and for years I thought love meant endurance." The room stills. Every ear tilts toward him. I believed that being patient, being forgiving, being silent, made me good. But silence doesn't heal violence. It hides it. Until someone decides not to hide anymore. His voice doesn't tremble, though his eyes glisten. My mother taught me that kindness isn't obedience, it's strength, exercised softly. The audience leans forward, drawn not by drama, but by truth. He pauses, glances toward the back row where I sit. For a second, his eyes find mine. The same eyes that once refused to see now meet the world without fear. I used to think the night my wife threw a glass was the night everything broke, he says. But that wasn't the shattering moment. The silence after, that was. That silence forced me to listen, to see, to change. And then, softly, he smiles. Sometimes, the person who saves you is the one who refuses to shout. Applause rises slowly, not loud, but layered, with gratitude, with release. I clap too, but I do it quietly, the way one honors something sacred. Afterward, people come up to him, shaking his hand, thanking him. I watch from a distance. There's a glow about him, not pride, but peace. On the way home, he says little. We drive through the streets we used to avoid, the old florist district, the courthouse, the park where he used to play. Everything looks smaller now, almost gentle. At a stoplight, he glances at me. Do you ever regret calling the police? I shake my head. I regret waiting as long as I did. He nods, thoughtful. I think I understand now. Boundaries aren't cruel. No, I say softly. They're maps back to ourselves. When we reach home, he helps me carry the flowers inside. I arrange them in the vase on the kitchen table. White roses this time, delicate but firm. The petals catch the afternoon light. They remind me of that night, the wine, the glass, the wound, and how every scar eventually learns to breathe again. After Daniel leaves, the house grows quiet in the most beautiful way. Not the emptiness of loss, but the fullness of solitude. I make tea. The kettle hums, steady and kind. Then I go to the cabinet and take out the wooden box, the one with the inscription, "For when I forget my worth." Inside, the shards of glass are no longer sharp. Over the past year, I'd sanded their edges, one by one, until they were smooth enough to hold. I'd kept them not as evidence, but as reminders of what can break and still become beautiful. I pick up one piece and hold it against the light. It catches the sun, scattering small halos on the wall. For a moment, the room glows. My voice, low and steady, fills the stillness. I thought the glass broke that night, but it was the silence that shattered. The sentence feels like an ending and a beginning at once. I place the shard back in the box, close the lid, and set it beside the teapot on the table. The porcelain still carries its golden crack, the one we mended months ago. When I pour the tea, the liquid moves, through it gently, without leaking. Daniel's words echo faintly from memory. It smells like home. I pour one cup for him, even though he's gone for the day, and one for myself. The tea steams upward, curling into the air like forgiveness released from duty. Outside, the morning light has shifted again. The garden glistens with dew, the petals bending under their own brightness. I take a rose from the vase, trim the stem, and set it in a small glass by the window. White, luminous, unflinching. Then I sit, both hands wrapped around the cup, watching sunlight spill through the clean pane and onto the table. The gold touches everything, the wood, the teapot, the mended shard resting in its box. For the first time, I realize peace doesn't arrive when noise stops. It arrives when you no longer need to explain yourself to it. I whisper, mostly to the air, kindness isn't obedience. Its strength is exercised softly. The words hang there, warm and certain. The camera of the world would fade here. On the soft gleam of a cup being set down, the sigh of a woman who has finally unlearned fear, and the morning light stretching across a quiet table. And before the image fades completely, I'd like to leave one last thought, one final invitation to whoever might still be listening. If you've ever lived through something that made you go silent, tell me your story, because sometimes your voice is someone else's awakening.